Bonobos from launching the company here at the GSB in 2007 to selling it 10 years later for $310 million is truly inspiring. I'm so excited to dive into all of this today, but before we begin, I wanted to introduce Bonobos to those of you who may not be as familiar with the product. So, in a view from the top first, let the fashion show begin.
On your left, you have Yash Shane in Italian stretch chinos. On your right, John Henry Styles in original stretch watch chinos. On your left, we have Diego Ramirez in original stretch watch chinos. On your right, James Underwood in stretch watch chino 2.0. Oh my God. On your left, we have Ashirwad Gupta in yarn dye stretch chinos and Mike Peng in slim straight chinos. Amazing. On your left, we have Aramide Olaniyan. On your right, Jonathan Wilkins in original stretch watch chinos. On your left, Sonny Stevens in the stretch weekday warrior dress pants and Logan Randolph with the Bonobos light wash jeans. Last but not least, on your left, John Gilhooly in stretch weekday warriors and Joel Bateman with the stretch watch chino 2.0. Please give a big hand for our models. Amazing.
I'm sure you've seen and been a part of quite a few fashion shows.
No, not like that. Not like that.
Me either. Well, Andy, many people know you for the pants that we just saw, and if they didn't before, they do now. But not many people know about what you refer to as your ghost story. I'd like to read a powerful excerpt from your book, Burn Rate, if that's okay with you.
That sounds good.
Okay. Thank you. In 2016, on the precipice of selling Bonobos, the startup I'd been building for the previous 9 years, I flew into a manic spiral and was hospitalized for a week in the psych ward at Bellevue in New York. When I was discharged, I was met by NYPD officers who took me to jail, where I was charged with felony and misdemeanor assault.
Good cliffhanger.
Yeah. Thank you. Not many successful business leaders talk about their struggle with mental health. So first of all, thank you for being so open and doing so. Yeah. We'll spend a good portion of the interview later discussing this, but every story has a beginning, so let's start with yours.
Yeah, sounds good.
You grew up in the Midwest, the son of a U.S. history teacher and an ultrasound tech. Tell us a bit more about your upbringing and how it influenced you.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because the editor and my agent basically said, we need a chapter at the beginning of your book about your upbringing. And my initial reaction was, there's nothing interesting about my upbringing. I hadn't really thought of anything that unique about it. And then as I got to work on that, I was like, oh, there's some stuff here. My mom's a Indian immigrant, born in a refugee town on the way from Rawalpindi, Pakistan to New Delhi, India at the time of the partition. somewhere between 1 and 2 million were killed at a time when 14 million people were displaced. So her origin story is in the midst of that strife, settled in New Delhi, came to the US when she was 20. Her father grew ill from emphysema. He was the only one who was of financial means, so it was financially extremely stressful. And her mother was a child bride, so promised to be married at about 10 or 11, married by 12 or 13, 2 miscarriages as a teenager, then 2 children who died in infancy, and then 7 children, the middle of whom is my mom. And my mom's oldest sister, my Masi, delivered me. She became an OBGYN. And so if you ever had this dynamic in your family where you have an aunt who can say to you, I put you in this world, I can take you out of it, you're being sassy. So that was a bit on my mom's family. And my dad's family were kind of classic Scandinavian Midwesterners. So, you know, Danish, Swedish, Norwegian, all of that. And so I grew up in a biracial household. And I think maybe the most interesting part of that, in retrospect, for me, is how different the cultures were around communication. And so in my dad's family, you don't talk about small conflicts. Those bubble up and become big conflicts. And so eventually you don't speak at all. Very tragically, he doesn't speak to either of his living siblings. On my mom's side of the family, you say exactly what you think to everyone except the person that you think it about. So it's all the information gets around, but with no conflict. My mom's a little different with us. And fast forward to later, now I'm married to a Brazilian Jew who's descended of a Brazilian and New York City Jews, and you say exactly what you think in real time to everyone except the person, to the person that you think it about. Such that the first time I had dinner with my now wife and mother-in-law, either my Scandinavian side or my Indian side was in the bathroom dry heaving, being like, I can't be a part of this family. But in truth was that might have been a family, you know, coming together versus falling apart. So this is somewhat some of the origin story for my family. And I think the other piece of it is my sister. I have an incredibly loving older sister. In Hindi, we call it our Didi. We have a business together now, which actually is a really bad idea. We'll talk about friendship in business and family in business. In truth, it's brought us much closer together because we have more time to spend. But it's challenging. Family and business is challenging, just as friendship and business is challenging.
Well, Andy, we have something in common. My mom also tells me that she brought me into this world and she can take me out, so I've heard that as well. Yeah. But you grew up in the Midwest and you end up leaving and coming to the GSB. Here in 2005 is where the idea for Bonobos was born.
Yeah.
Your roommate in Schwab, Brian Spaley, ended up becoming your co-founder.
Yeah.
Take us back to those early days of Bonobos on campus.
Yeah.
And why men's pants?
Yeah. So it was inverted, actually. Brian was the founder of Bonobos, and I became his co-founder. And the way that it went down is this. Brian came in and felt like there's this one problem that he had, which is his pants didn't fit. And so he did one of these projects, I can't remember what they're called, G300, it used to be called a 300 project. And he went out and he got like the survey with all of our classmates. And the basic insights were guys wear jeans because khaki pants and wool pants don't fit that well. So that was like insight number 1. And insight number 2 was guys don't like shopping in stores. And then insight number 3 was that J. Crew and Banana Republic were like the 2 main places. So his view about men's pants was very specific, which is that if the pants fit around your thighs and your butt, they were probably too tight in the waist. So that when you sat down, you were really uncomfortable back in an era where you had to wear pants to work, right? And so then like as soon as you got home, you threw your jeans on. and like your weekend going out was like denim. And the thing that happened in premium denim in the 90s was there was stretch that was added to the fabric, which had never happened before. So step one was Brian added stretch to khaki pants and wool pants, which was not a massive thing at the time. The other insight that Brian had was that pants are kind of boring. And so he developed this contrast liner that would peek through the back pockets. They would kind of create a conversation, they called it conversational prints in a very specific place. And he started just selling pants to our classmates. So he found a factory in San Francisco, and he found a pattern maker in San Francisco, part of like the last dying, vestige of the fashion industry here. And he brought pants that he had worn where he would buy like a size 34 that fit his thighs, and then tailor it into a 32, which is like a $80 alteration, probably that no one here has ever done, because you have Bonobos, right? And Bonobos pants are made with that contour, like curved waistband. So then he drove to LA, he bought a bunch of fabric, he picked a really cool like pinwheel corduroy, like really thin, really lightweight, it had great stretch, which is kind of perfect for Northern California because it's cool in the morning, and then it kind of heats up during the day. And he just started selling them to our classmates for $100. And it was like, well, one person was wearing them, then 5, and then at some point, like half of our classmates were buying pants. We did a pants party at our house. I don't know if anyone has this house on El Camino Real. It used to be called the White House. Anyone live there?
Still around today.
Still
Yes.
around? Yeah, so Brian tried to rebrand it to Pleasure Town, which didn't stick. So then it went back to the White House. Brian is an eccentric character, and hopefully many of you will meet him in MGE or have met him. And we had a pants party where people were playing like whatever games and lawn games, and we sold $16,000 of pants that day. And so if you ever have a product where you sell that much and it's a legal product, you might be onto something.
Yeah. And you definitely were. That is incredible to sell $16,000 worth of pants in one day. After the GSB, you decide to work on Bonobos full time, while Brian decides to take a job in PE and work on Bonobos on nights and weekends. What gave you that conviction? I know so many of us entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs are wondering whether or not we should take that leap of faith.
I went on a GSB service trip to East Africa, and it was like 12 or 13. You have these service learning trips still? And we did a homestay for 2 nights. And I lived with a guy named Stanley and his wife and 2 kids. And it was a clay brick house without running water. They prepared a wonderful meal, of course. And then there was like the big bucket where you dump it over your head. And generally it's cold water, which is like the ice bucket challenge. And of course they like found a way to heat it, which was wonderful. And it's also like an outhouse where you shower or close by. And then I came back to the White House, the one here in El Camino Real. And my bathroom, you had to walk outside to get to. And it had 2 shower heads, which is plush. And I turned them on, and like the hot water hit me. And I had this moment where I was like, we do not actually take that much risk. The way that we define it in the US for people in the cohort in this room, it's actually not risky to start a company. It's an insult to people whose lives are actually risky to think of it as risk in similar terms. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way. Many of us have reasons. There are medical cost reasons and children, and there are things to be thoughtful of. But in terms of having our future net present value is in pretty good shape. And so if you redefine the risk of not doing something that you love, and that I think is a spiritual risk rather than a financial risk. And so that trip really changed me. And I felt like, okay, even though I have $3,000 in the bank and $182,000 of debt, maybe a third of which was elective, just having fun and traveling, I'm probably not, going to starve one day. And with that perspective, I was like, okay, then what can we go do? And I had no good ideas of my own, so I thought, okay, I'll just steal Brian's idea.
Worked out well. That is a helpful reframe around risk, and that reframe allowed you to take the leap of faith to move to New York and to work on Bonobos. At the time, you were truly a pioneer building a direct-to-consumer, digitally native brand. Just to take everyone back to 2007, Amazon was irrelevant in fashion. People thought e-commerce was going to be an afterthought. And if you were a fashion brand not selling through the likes of Barney's and Bloomingdale's, you were doomed to fail. So Andy, how did you have this aha moment to build a digitally native brand, and how did you convince others?
Well, first, what is it? Great entrepreneurs are just thieves. And then second, the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. So if you want to build the future, don't look to the future. Look to something that's in the corner, in the present. And then kind of past is prologue, which is that more or less we're the same species, last 200,000 years. So there's probably something in history that might alert you to what was coming. For that third thing, for me, it was that I'd worked at Land's End as a second-year Bain AC. Has anyone spent a couple winters in Dodgeville, Wisconsin? It's cold. There's not a lot to do other than just work. And I got to see this storied catalog retailer that didn't have stores. And I remember one day touring the call center and seeing all the notes from customers that had been mailed in. And there was a note from a woman that said, "Dear Elizabeth, thank you so much for calling me to wake me up the morning of my wedding. My mom was a mess. My bridesmaids wanted to sleep in. You're the best, Carolyn." And I was like, oh. The paradox of retail is that by not having brick and mortar stores and going direct, and this was the catalog innovation, you can actually build a better customer service relationship. And then in terms of what was happening in the present that was in the corner, there was this company called Zappos. And an entrepreneur named Tony Hsieh, and backed by Sequoia. And it was startups, how there's little rumors. You don't know exactly what's going on. You see that they exist. And they were selling shoes. And everyone at the time, this was the time where e-commerce, people were selling cars on eBay Motors. But it was well, you're never going to sell shoes because you got to try them on. Well, don't you have to drive the car? But Tony had free returns both ways, 365-day return policy, and a really spirited service team who were core to the company culture, right? And that's obviously what Delivering Happiness is about, the book, and the irony of that title relative to Tony's fate. Well, I guess we'll get to that type of conversation later. So I was like, well, if you can sell an existing soft goods product, footwear, then presumably you can sell an existing soft goods product, clothing, and why can't you build your own brand, right? And then I kind of looked at the history of the Gap, which used to sell Levi's jeans and records. And then an entrepreneur named Mickey Drexler came in and said, well, the margins on Levi's jeans are here. Why don't we make Gap jeans? We would get another 20% margins. Well, it's like, well, you're a retailer with stores, you're not a brand. But he said, no, let's vertically integrate that. And now everything from, you pick it, right? From IKEA to Zara, it's all vertical now because of that margin trade. So I took those three ideas and put them together, and then I went out to pitch people on the concept, and everyone said no. And that made me really feisty. And also is a part of innovation, which is that it's got to be contrarian at the time.
Well, you were really onto something in building this direct-to-consumer brand. On the surface, it seems like things are going well. This is 2007, 2008. But internally, if you look under the hood of Bonobos, you were dealing with quite a bit of friction with your co-founder, Brian Spaley, as you've alluded to. So can you take us back to that time in the life of Bonobos and what happened there?
Well, I blamed everything on him. Right? It's easy in life, I think, to see someone else as the problem in your life story. And then if you get to my age or beyond, 43 now, at some point, hopefully you realize that you're the problem in your life story. And it's a little bit debilitating to take that on, but it's also very freeing because then you don't have to stand in judgment of others in the same way. And you also have agency to fix it if you don't need someone else to change. But in 2008 and 9, I was 28, 29 years old, and I had these issues with conflict that I described. I wasn't able to verbalize conflict and have really difficult conversations with Brian because he was my friend. And now there's this whole school of radical candor that talks about if you're high on caring but low on conflict, you're in a bucket that they call ruinous empathy. I was like, that's me. I'm the ruinous empathy person. And the problem with ruinous empathy is, in theory, you care about other people, but you care about them so much that you never actually tell them the truth, right? Which is not that caring. And so we ended up in a place where my anger was building and building towards Brian for perceived slights. My stresses at the company as we hired more people and raised more money were going up. And I remember having a call with one of the professors at the GSB. The only reason Bonobos exists outside of Brian's innovation from a financial standpoint is that two professors back the company, Joe Peterson and Andy Ratcliffe. And I called Andy one day and I sent him our P&L. And I was like, Brian we have a major inventory problem. We designed this swimsuits thing, it's not working. And Andy literally on the call was like, no, the problem on your PL is your OpEx. It's your operating expenses, which is actually what Brian was, I felt, criticizing me for. But it wasn't necessarily criticism, it was challenge. Because he's like, we're hiring too many people. And I was convinced that we had to bring on a great VP of engineering from Zappos and that we had to build this tech company. And Brian was like, it's kind of a pants company. And I was like, well, it's a tech company that sells pants. And so we had all these vectors of conflict, but we were unable to resolve it, I think in retrospect, due to my limitations. And Brian's not perfect, of course, but in our relationship, the friendship was ultimately sublimated to the business discussion, which is the business conversations, which is also common. So I woke up at some point dealing with a lot of depression. I really disliked Brian. I wasn't so happy with myself, and that led to a co-founder divorce that happened 2 years after the company's formation.
Yeah. Given the conflict you described and that leading to the co-founder split, is there any advice you would give to GSB students in terms of thinking through how not only to select a co-founder, but also safeguards to put in place in the case of a co-founder divorce?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to selecting GSB co-founders, don't. But if you insist, and I do think there's something to be explored, which is that the right co-founder for your company might be at Stanford, but might not be a GSB